end of the lecture is to talk a little bit about the historical eruptions. There has been a good number of historical eruptions, about a dozen of them, and these have not occurred on all the islands, but we have historical eruptions on La Palma, on Tenerife, on Lanzarote, and there was one offshore on El Hierro, but it was not onshore, so this is why the island is marked here a little differently. This is the 1971 eruption on La Palma. This is the 2021 eruption on La Palma. So this was probably one of the largest eruptions in the historical record after the 1730 eruption on Lanzarote. So here's a list of all the historical eruptions. We don't have to go into detail, but the first eruption, the first historical eruption, meaning documented eruption, was actually documented by Columbus on his way to the Americas. He was sailing by the island of Tenerife and he noted an eruption in the hillside. He didn't go himself, but it's an entry in his log, and he was quite smart about things. He said his sailors were very worried, and he said, "Oh, sailors, you don't need to be worried. It's nothing unusual. It's very similar to Mount Etna in Italy, where I'm from." And so apparently he would manage to calm his sailors down, and he reported the first eruption on the archipelago that is documented. And of course, the youngest one is this one here, 2021 on La Palma, and a whole series of them in between. So let's look at historical eruptions on Tenerife. There is the 1705 eruption here that had several vents, 3 vents in fact, 3 very small vents. Then the 1706 eruption, then the 1909 eruption, the 1798, and as I just mentioned, the 1492 eruption. So very, very briefly, just a few impressions. I don't want to go into detail now, but this is the 1492 eruption, and people have done analysis, and it's able to actually give a correct age for this eruption because of trees that were caught up in the eruption, and you can do the carbon-14 analysis, and the carbon-14 analysis confirmed that this eruption must have happened around the time when Columbus passed. And it produced a nice little lava flow, and we can map the lava flow today. It's called the Boca Cangrejo eruption of 1492. And here's a few impressions of that, and this is just a few vents that are likely associated with that eruption. So the 1705 eruption produced a little hill up in the mountains. This is this area here, and the Fasnia vents, and a very small eruption altogether. And there was a larger lava flow here in the Guima Valley, the Arafo lava flow, which didn't reach the sea, but it almost did. It went very close to the sea, but then it stopped. So here's a few impressions. The dark material is the 1705 eruptive material, but this area is completely uninhabited, so nobody got harmed and nobody got hurt. This is the vent in the Guima Valley, and it was producing a lava flow that was coming down here, but the population density was very low at the time, so not a lot of damage happened. 1706 was slightly different. This was a very unfortunate event on Tenerife. There was a volcano forming up here. It produced lava coming down here in several tongues or lobes. And just at the bottom of the cliff was the port village of Carachico. It was the main port for the American trade. And here's a painting, an oil painting from back in the day. And you can see the lavas entering the harbor basin. So this was the former harbor basin. And part of the harbor got filled with lava, which made the harbor basin too small for major ships, and it actually had, as a consequence, a major reorganization of the island's traffic system as a consequence. And this was quite devastating socioeconomically at the time. Although nobody got hurt, it was financially a bit of a disaster in 1706, and it led to the new capital being established in Santa Cruz on the other side of the island. The 1798 eruption, this is the eruption that was quite famous in Europe, and Humboldt heard about it, and Humboldt was so keen to see it that he came a year later. 1799 was the year Humboldt visited Tenerife, But of course the eruption had stopped by then. But Humboldt did see the events and he went up to Teide. He even established the height of Teide as the first kind of researcher that had a real clue of how to do it. And here we see the vent system of 1798. And then the 1909 eruption, here again the vents of it. This is a very small eruption. It only lasted 10 days, again high up in the mountain. Nobody got hurt, nothing got damaged. So a rather benign eruption, and people were actually going there and viewing the eruptive vent in 1909. Here's one of the earliest photographs from that time. Now, I mentioned Lanzarote and the Timon Fire eruption. The Timon Fire eruption was a bit more of a disaster. Actually, a quarter of the island of Lanzarote was covered with lava after the eruption. Most of the island had to be evacuated. The eruption lasted 6 years. And this was a really unpleasant event. It was probably the most intense eruption the archipelago has seen in historical times. But it led to the idea of using volcanic particles as a soil supplement. And afterwards, the island really grew rich on growing wine and all these kind of things. And there, a lot of cereals were suddenly grown, even potatoes. So from an agricultural point of view, it was a real revolution. But only after the eruption, of course. During the eruption, it was a disaster. And here you see a little map. The red areas are the areas covered by ash and lava. So a lot of the island was unfortunately destroyed, covered. A whole series of villages were really drowned out by lava. And nowadays they're digging into the lava, and you can actually see the remains of those villages that got covered with lava in 1730. And this is a wonderful time capsule for us today, studying that time. But of course, for the people at the time, it was a real disaster. So the Timon Fire National Park is the other big national park in the archipelago. It was established in 1974, and this is the Timon Fire National Park, named after the eruption, the Timon Fire eruption. And it's a large chunk of the island where you can't really walk freely. You can only go there with a guided tour or with a bus, and some of the excursions are going there. And if you have an interest in volcanoes, I recommend it highly. There's also the potential of doing a camel tour. If you're bold enough to sit on a camel, this might be of interest to you. So this is how it looks there, the Timon Fire area. It's like a wasteland, a volcanic wasteland. And the authorities want to preserve this geologically important landscape, and therefore you're not allowed to roam freely. You can only go there on guided tours on certain paths and roads that are permitted. So this is kind of some impressions from this area here, and it's rather spectacular from a volcanological point of view. Another feature there is that the lavas bring up this mineral here, and you will have the opportunity to purchase some jewelry or some raw materials of that, and this is the mineral olivine. It comes up in these rocks that we call dunites after the Dun Mountains in New Zealand, and it's a mantle mineral, and it's an iron magnesium silicate, and well, some people believe it gives you special energies. I don't know about that, but well, maybe it works. So it comes up in these nodules of mantle rock that are brought up by the lava. This is what the mantle, the earth mantle, is made of. It's got a lot of this beautiful little mineral olivine, and when it's a gemstone, we call it peridot. So, and well, it's not too expensive, actually. It's rather inexpensive because there's quite a lot of it. And the Romans used it already. Cleopatra loved it, apparently, because it's got a calming effect, so people say. So you have to potentially have your own experience with it when you have a look at it, see whether you like it or not. But it's a beautiful souvenir from the Canary Islands. In the Timon Fire National Park, there's still remnant heat. There's still a geyser, and there's hot air, and the local guides there, they throw some straw in it, and you see that it will ignite rather immediately. So still, since the eruption of 1730, there is still volcanic remnant activity, but There was a small eruption in 1824. After that, no more eruptions on Lanzarote. All of the other eruptions were in the western part of the archipelago. So El Hierro, well, we talked about El Hierro, and there's a rift here to the south, and no eruptions on El Hierro itself, but on this submarine ridge there was an eruption in 2011. And here's the village of La Restinga, and here on this submarine ridge there was a small eruption in 2011 lasting for about 6 months, and it produced a little submarine volcano. And here you see some of the material that has been bubbling up, and here there was a few kind of splashes in the water, but nobody got hurt, nothing bad really happened. Some rocks were floating on the ocean surface here. When they have enough bubbles and enough gas, then the rocks can float for a certain amount of time until they're completely water soaked, then they sink again. So for some short periods we had this rather intriguing phenomenon of swimming rocks. And it only lasted a few weeks, however, and then the rocks were gone. Now, La Palma, this is the last one in my list. There was a number of eruptions. Here's all the historical eruptions, making it the most volcanically prolific island in the archipelago. Here's an image from 1677 of an eruption. This was an eruption in the southern area. The southern part of the island is sparsely populated. The north is densely populated, and the new eruption was unfortunately in this northern part where loads of people lived. So here are some photos from the 1949 eruption, and this was mainly in this part of the island. And here you see various lava flows from the different episodes: 1949, 1971, this is also 49, 1677, and here the new eruption in red. The older ones are in orange, the new one here is in red. That's the 2021 eruption. Here's some impressions from the 2021 eruption. Vast amount of lavas were emitted, and there was a lot of settlements in the path of the lava. People were evacuated. Unfortunately, not all pets could be evacuated, so some animals were staying behind, which was a bit of a drama. And there's a few rather intense stories about pets that were partly rescued, partly not. And the devastation of agricultural land and settlements is of course unparalleled. So this is day one of the eruption. This is when the vent opened, and this is at the end of the eruption after 87 days. And within 87 days, this whole mountain grew out of nothing. Quite impressive. And here we see the volcano erupting, and here we see the lavas coming down. Here's a banana plantation, and partly the banana plantation was swallowed by the lava, partly it's still there. And here I went to exactly this boundary. Here we see the lava, here we see the banana plants within a meter of each other. So this is really nature and volcano impacting on society as we know it. And this is me standing on top of the lava field looking towards the volcano. This is just an ocean of rubbly lava, meters thick, and it's still hot inside. So for years there will be nothing you can do with that land. So this is, as I said, socioeconomically a real catastrophe. So the eruption lasted for 85, some people say 87 days. 8,000 people were evacuated. 2,800 buildings were destroyed. Almost 1,000 hectares of plantation and farmland were destroyed. 70 kilometers of vital roads, including a major north-south connection, were destroyed. And the good thing is nobody died, but the financial burden for the island is just, well, unbelievably high. So here is my colleague Guillem, whom I saw in Barcelona. He works at the University of Barcelona, and the volcano is just here, you can see it. And here's one of the houses, almost completely covered in volcanic ash. So here I'd like to close, and I hope I gave you a good impression of the geology and the volcanology of the islands. And I thank you for your attention.